A lot of people have this misconception that in order to become financially independent and to become financially free, you have to pay off all your debt and become debt-free. But that's simply not true. Today, we're going to discuss this topic, address this misconception, talk about when it's good to have debt, when it's bad to have debt, so you can use this information to generate even more wealth. What's going on? Welcome back to my channel. This is Alice, and welcome back to Money with Alice, where we talk about personal finance, investing, and a whole lot of other stuff. So if you haven't already, make sure to click a like and also subscribe so you don't miss out on a lot of future really good content from me. There's a couple of things that are certain in life: taxes, death, and also debt. So a lot of us have debt. It's okay to have debt. Some of us might even feel kind of guilty for having debt or think that having debt is just bad. Any debt equals bad, but that's actually not true. There's a thing as good debt and there's a thing as bad debt. So today we're going to discuss when it's actually okay to have debt and when you should actually pay off your debt. And hopefully after this discussion, you'll be able to figure out when it's appropriate to have debt and when it's appropriate to pay that debt off. Let's start off with a quick definition. So what is debt? Well, when I talk about debt throughout this video, what I really mean by debt is just anything you borrowed in the past that you'll have to pay off in the future. So this is like credit card, this is like your student loans, this is like mortgages. Did you buy like a car or a house? All sorts of things like that. That's all debt. Now, for those of us who are just starting on our financial paths, you might see things on the internet that are like, oh, if you have additional money, always pay off debt. But that's incorrect. When you think about debt, you need to think about debt in the context of your overall portfolio construction and your overall wealth. Sometimes there is a concept called opportunity cost that you need to consider. So what do I mean by opportunity cost? Well, if you have money and say you have debt, when you get money, you can do one of two things. One, you can use that money to pay off debt. Two, you can use that money to invest in the market. So let's work with these two given constraints, right? You have money, but you can either do one of two things. You can invest or you can put it into the market. So how do you evaluate and how do you go through the thought process? Now, the concept here is called opportunity cost. You need to evaluate if you pay down your debt, is it worthwhile for you to pay down that debt, and how much are you losing in terms of opportunity if you had put that money into the market instead? I think the easiest way to understand this is via an example. So let's do an example. Say you have debt that is accumulating interest rate at a 2%. Now, when you have money, do you want to pay down your debt that is at a 2%, or do you want to put this money into the market? So let's start out with scenario one. Say you put this money into the market instead. What you're losing out on is in the future, you'll have to pay that 2% interest on your debt. But if you had invested in the market on average generates about 10% every single year. So you are going to gain 10% by putting that money into the market. So on a net basis, this means accounting for the cost of your debt, but also accounting for the additional upside that you gain based on your investments. It's a 10% minus a 2%, meaning that you're still gaining an 8%. Now, in this scenario, if you had put the money into the market, you're still coming out at a 8% gain versus the 2% that you would have effectively saved if you have put your money into just paying down your debt. So in situations like this, that's when it's okay to have debt, because you're using the debt to make a productive use of your money, and you're using that money to generate a greater return than you would have if you had just paid down your debt. Now, the second option here is rather than putting this money into the market, you could have just put that money and paid down your debt. But remember, your debt is at a 2% interest rate and the equity market is at a 10%. So in this case, if you put all of your money to paying down your debt, you're going to save that 2%. But what you're losing out on is that potential 10% gain. So what that means is in scenario here, you are getting the 2% savings, but in scenario one, the one we just discussed, you're gaining 8%. So in conclusion for this scenario, it's a much better return for you if you had put that money into the market rather than paying down your debt. So that's why it's not always good to pay down debt, because you have to consider the entire opportunity cost. So what are you losing out on if you put that money to pay down your debt? Could there have been something more productive you could have done with that money, like put it into the market, put it into investment, something that generates higher than what it costs you to borrow that money, so higher than that 2%. The general rule of thumb here is if your debt is pretty cheap, like long-term debts like mortgage, or right now for student loans, given COVID, student loans have interest-free accumulation, it might be a good idea to put that money to put into the market. So in situations where you have really cheap debt, or your debt is relatively inexpensive, and you're able to use that money you would have used to pay down your debt to generate a higher return, like put into the market, putting into investments, it's a much better use of your money to put it into the market rather than paying down debt. But if you have really expensive debt, say something like a credit card debt where the average interest rate is 18%, pretty hard for you to make an 18% return on the money. So in this situation, it's much better to pay down your expensive debt, because chances are you're not going to be able to find a return of 18% anywhere in the public markets or any sort of investment, so it becomes a lot more costly for you to borrow. If the money you're borrowing is cheap and you can generate a much more productive, higher return using the money you borrow, then go ahead and don't pay down that debt. Use it for something more productive. But if you can't generate a high return because you have really expensive debt like credit card loans that are 18%, and you can't find something that's higher than 18% to invest in, pay down your debt. In summary, not all debt is bad. Consider the entire opportunity cost and the entire return of all of your actions. If your interest rate on your debt is low, don't be in a hurry to pay it off. It's okay to use it to do something else more productive with your time. If your interest rate is high, consider paying that off, unless you're able to make some really high yielding returns of investments, in which case go ahead, but understand that investments are also pretty risky. Thanks for tuning into today's video. I hope you guys learned something about debt, and remember that not all debt is bad. Consider the overall costs and the overall gains for all of your actions in conjunction as a whole package, rather than just thinking all debt is bad, because not all debt is bad. Debt can be used to generate greater returns for your overall wealth. If it's a low interest paying debt, maybe you should throw that money into the market instead. But if it's a high interest rate debt, you should probably pay that off. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video today, and I hope you guys enjoyed this little snippet. If you did, please give this video a like, and also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos, and also it really supports my channel, so I really appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon in a future video. Bye!